So tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, there's a massive kinetic escalation threatened in the Middle East.
Yeah, right on the horizon.
Exactly. And by 8:01 p.m., an artificial intelligence algorithm predicts that the resulting shockwave will eventually vaporize like 35% of your retirement account.
Wow.
Yeah, it predicts it'll spike global inflation to 15% and completely freeze the credit markets that, allow businesses to make payroll. We're going to find out exactly how it makes that calculation.
We really are.
So welcome to the Deep Dive. Today's mission is exploring a highly specific experiment, basically designed to test whether consumer-grade AI actually understands the terrifying mathematical domino effect of a global military conflict.
Right, because the source material we have today is this fascinating, really dense text detailing a prompt that a user fed into the AI tool Copilot. We're looking at a scenario set against the backdrop of the ongoing war involving Israel, the U.S., and Iran, which, in the timeline of our source, began about 5 weeks ago on February 28th, 2026.
Yeah.
So the user fed the AI a specific geopolitical catalyst and basically forced it to project the compounding economic damage.
Okay, but before we go any further, we really need to establish a very firm boundary for you, the listener.
Yeah, definitely.
The source text we're analyzing today contains some highly politically charged scenarios. I mean, it specifically references the ongoing conflict and a stated threat of infrastructure destruction from Donald Trump.
Right, that's literally in the prompt.
Exactly. So we want to be entirely clear here. We are not taking sides, we're not endorsing any political viewpoint, and we're certainly not in the business of predicting the future.
No, not at all.
Our sole job today is to impartially break down the exact scenario provided in the text and just rigorously analyze the AI's economic math based strictly on the parameters it was given.
Yeah, we are focusing purely on the intersection of macroeconomic theory and artificial intelligence. The politics, well, they're just the catalyst in the prompt, but the deep dive is really about the math.
It's just the math. So, to make sense of the AI's final projection, we first need to establish the baseline reality that the text describes.
Right, where we're starting from.
Because even before we get to tomorrow's 8 o'clock threat, the baseline is already, well, bordering on catastrophic.
Yeah, it's pretty bleak.
The text notes that since the war began 5 weeks ago, average gas prices have jumped 38%. We're sitting at roughly $4.12 a gallon, with projections already pointing to $5.25.
And if you're looking at the raw inputs, I mean, pre-war Brent crude oil was trading around $71.32 a barrel.
And now,
The baseline forecast now, it could reach $150 to $200 a barrel.
wow.
Yeah. But the crucial element the text emphasizes is the underlying cause here. This isn't just a speculative bubble driven by nervous Wall Street traders.
Right, it's real.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The baseline is this severe because of the physical, tangible destruction of critical energy infrastructure in the Middle East.
Okay, and the source mentions a specific bottleneck for repairing that damage, noting a recovery timeline of 3 to 5 years, which is huge.
It's massive.
It attributes this delay to a massive backlog for, and I quote, specialized large-frame gas turbines.
Yeah.
Help me understand the scale of that. I read that phrase, and I immediately picture, like, a global supply chain traffic jam.
That's a good way to look at it.
Let's say you get into a car accident and ruin your engine.
Hmm.
But instead of just ordering a part from the dealership, you find out your car needs a bespoke, like hand-forged titanium drive shaft produced by only one factory in the world.
Okay.
And they have a 3-year waiting list.
Yeah.
Your car is essentially a paperweight until then. Is that kind of what we're dealing with on a macro level?
That is a highly accurate way to frame it, actually. When we talk about specialized large-frame gas turbines, we aren't talking about off-the-shelf industrial parts that you can just, ramp up production on by adding a night shift.
You can't just order them on Amazon.
No, not at all. These are monumental pieces of engineering. They're often custom designed for specific power plants, requiring microscopic tolerances, specialized alloys capable of withstanding extreme thermal stress.
Wow.
And manufacturing them requires highly specialized facilities and deeply experienced engineers. You cannot simply digitize a blueprint and 3D print a massive gas turbine overnight.
Okay, so if we can't build these critical components any faster, what does that actually mean for the timeline of the economic recovery?
It's not good.
Like, does a physical reality, like a 2 to 4 year manufacturing backlog, essentially lock in global economic pain completely independent of whatever's happening on the battlefield.
Yes. That is the grim reality of the baseline scenario. The physical damage operates on a timeline that's entirely divorced from political resolutions.
Right.
Even if a comprehensive peace treaty were signed this very afternoon, the infrastructure remains physically obliterated.
It's still broken.
Exactly. And because that infrastructure cannot be quickly replaced, analysts are already projecting a 15 to 20% drop in the S&P 500 based solely on this existing bottleneck.
A 20% drop in the S&P just from the baseline condition.
Here's the baseline, yeah.
Why such a severe market reaction to a regional energy deficit?
Because a sustained energy deficit of that magnitude fundamentally alters the cost of everything.
Oh, I see.
It pushes global inflation aggressively upward, nearing double digits. When central banks see inflation climbing toward 10%, their mandate compels them to act.
Because they have to keep it down.
Right. Their primary mechanism for fighting inflation is raising interest rates to cool the economy. By keeping those rates high enough to restrict borrowing and spending, they're effectively forced to trigger a global recession just to stabilize prices.
Wow.
The global economy is already standing on the precipice of that recession before any new threats are even introduced into the equation.
Okay, so we have our starting point. The global economy is hovering over the cliff.
Very much so.
And then the source text introduces a specific catalyst to test Copilot's comprehension of these compounding pressures.
Yeah, the prompt.
The user inputs a threat. Donald Trump following through on a promise to completely destroy Gulf State power plants and bridges starting at 8 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, Tuesday, April 7th.
Mm-hmm.
The user then imposes very rigid constraints on the AI, basically demanding it describe the exacerbation of these conditions over the coming 2 years in a single paragraph, using as many figures and percentages as possible.
Yeah, and the constraints of that prompt are arguably the most revealing part of the experiment.
How so?
Well, the user is intentionally boxing the AI into a highly condensed, data-heavy format.
I mean, I have to question the utility of a prompt like that. By forcing a language model to cram as many percentages as possible into a single paragraph about a military strike, aren't we just prompting it to generate a worst-case scenario disaster movie?
That's a fair question.
It feels like we're asking for terrifying numbers. And the AI is simply obliging by hallucinating extreme financial jargon. Like, how do we know this is a realistic economic forecast and not just a creative writing exercise in apocalyptic math?
It is a vital skepticism to maintain when dealing with large language models, for sure. They're notorious for generating plausible-sounding but mathematically incoherent responses.
Right.
However, the value of this specific stress test lies in analyzing the relationships between the numbers it generates.
Okay.
The prompt forces the AI to synthesize how an isolated kinetic geopolitical action, the destruction of specific bridges and power plants, translates directly into quantitative macroeconomic shocks over a 2-year horizon.
But how do we verify that the AI isn't just, stringing those numbers together randomly?
Because the relationships between global energy supply, inflation, central bank policy, and equity markets operate on established mathematical correlations.
Oh, I get it.
If the AI simply spat out random, terrifying percentages, the underlying economic logic would break down immediately under scrutiny.
It wouldn't make sense to an economist.
Exactly. To successfully fulfill the prompt without hallucinating nonsense, the AI has to accurately map the interconnected web of global supply and demand. The test is designed to reveal whether Copilot truly comprehends macroeconomic theory and the cascading mechanisms of a supply shock, or if it is merely guessing.
So let's put that to the test and unpack the dense paragraph Copilot actually generated.
Let's do it.
It begins by mapping the immediate physical impact of tomorrow's 8 p.m. threat. The AI projects this campaign would cause the, quote, structural collapse of regional energy systems, removing an additional 5 to 10 million barrels per day of effective supply.
That's a huge hit.
Yeah, and it states this would chronically impair 20 to 25% of global export capacity.
See, the sheer volume of that sudden absence from the global market is the linchpin for the rest of the calculation. Taking 25% of export capacity offline is an unprecedented shock to the system.
And the AI then tracks the resulting price explosion. According to Copilot, Brent crude oil blows right past our already grim baseline of $150.
Just rockets past it.
It projects crude landing in the $220 to $260 per barrel range. Domestically, it calculates U.S. gas surging to between $6.50 and $7.25 a gallon by early 2027.
That represents the direct linear consequence of the supply destruction.
Supply and demand.
Right, the supply of oil plummets drastically, but the global demand remains highly inelastic in the short term. I mean, people still need to commute, logistics companies still need to transport food, factories still require power.
You can't just stop using it overnight.
Exactly. When demand is inflexible and supply vanishes, the price mechanism just goes vertical.
The section of Copilot's response that genuinely gave me pause was its assertion that energy-intensive sectors seize.
Yeah, that's a chilling phrase.
I want to apply a more specific analogy to that than just saying the economy slows down. If petroleum is the blood supply of global commerce, cutting off 25% of export capacity isn't just a wound. It is a massive tourniquet applied to major arteries.
It cuts off the flow entirely.
Think about the shipping industry. A massive cargo vessel runs on bunker fuel. If the cost of that fuel triples to accommodate $260 oil, the shipping company doesn't just drive the boat slower.
No, they can't.
The margins collapse, the routes become mathematically impossible to operate, and the ship simply doesn't sail.
And the necrosis of those economic limbs is exactly what the algorithm is calculating.
Wow, necrosis.
Yeah, it's looking at aviation, heavy manufacturing, global logistics, and recognizing that at $260 a barrel, the fundamental business models of those sectors just disintegrate.
Right.
They cannot simply pass a 300% fuel increase onto the consumer without destroying the demand for their own services.
So this is where I need you to break down the mechanics for me, step by step.
Yeah.
It's because Copilot concludes this paragraph by stating that these conditions force central banks to, quote, contract global GDP by 2 to 4%, ultimately crashing the S&P 500 by 35%.
A massive drop.
Yeah, and I'm a business owner paying more for gas, but how does that gas price explicitly force a massive contraction of global gross domestic product and wipe out a third of the stock market? Walk me through the exact domino effect the AI is predicting.
Okay, the AI is outlining a textbook, unavoidable sequence of compounding recessionary pressures.
The dominoes.
The first domino, as we discussed, is the localized fuel cost spiking. When crude hits $260, the cost to manufacture goods, transport raw materials, and deliver finished products doubles or triples across the board.
Everything gets more expensive.
Right. Every single node in the supply chain becomes exponentially more expensive to operate.
And those costs inevitably trickle down to the consumer at the grocery store or, the hardware store.
Which triggers the second domino. Hyper-accelerated inflation. Copilot projects this environment would drive global inflation into the 12 to 15% range.
Which is astronomical.
It is. This is where central banks, like the Federal Reserve, are forced to step in. Their foundational mandate is maintaining price stability.
Right.
When they see inflation running at 15%, they have only one effective lever to pull. They must actively destroy consumer demand to bring prices back down.
To make people stop buying.
Exactly. They achieve this by aggressively raising interest rates to levels that punish borrowing and incentivize hoarding cash.
Okay, so the Fed hikes rates specifically to inflict pain on the economy and stop people from buying things.
Yeah.
But how does that translate to the business owner who is suddenly, unable to make payroll?
That leads to the third and most destructive domino, the freezing of the credit markets. This is the crucial mechanism the AI accurately identified. Modern businesses do not operate entirely on cash reserves. They rely heavily on short-term credit, like commercial paper, to manage daily operations, buy inventory, and basically bridge the gap between paying their employees and receiving payment from their clients.
Right, cash flow is always slightly delayed.
Right. So when central banks push interest rates to punitive levels, borrowing that operational money becomes prohibitively expensive.
Meaning the business might have plenty of customers and a great product, but they literally cannot afford the bridge loan required to keep the lights on this month.
Precisely. Mortgages become unaffordable, paralyzing the housing sector. Servicing existing corporate debt becomes a massive drain on capital.
It just grinds to a halt.
Yeah, the credit freeze is the mechanism that takes a healthy business and starves it of operational liquidity. Companies are forced to halt expansion, liquidate inventory, and ultimately initiate massive layoffs just to survive the interest payments.
Which brings us to the final domino. If massive sectors of the economy are laying off workers and halting operations because they can't access credit, their quarterly earnings are going to collapse.
Exactly. The earnings plummet and the equity markets reprice the value of those companies accordingly.
Right.
The AI calculates that the S&P 500, which was already projecting a 20% drop simply due to the physical backlog of those gas turbines we discussed, would instead suffer a catastrophic drawdown of 25 to 35%.
35%.
Yeah. The brilliance of the AI's response isn't just the final terrifying number, though. It's the fact that it successfully articulated the entire connective tissue.
It mapped the exact pathway.
It mapped how an isolated kinetic strike on a piece of infrastructure in the Middle East instantly drives energy inflation, which forces central banks into restrictive policies, which strangles global credit markets, ultimately crashing equities and locking in a multi-year global recession.
Wow.
It proved it understands the macroeconomic theory connecting those disparate events.
So let's synthesize the journey we just took. We started by looking at a severe physical reality, a localized conflict causing a 38% bump at the gas pump.
Right.
We dug into the incredibly complex manufacturing bottleneck of massive gas turbines, realizing that global supply chain fragility essentially guarantees years of economic pain, regardless of political outcomes.
Completely independent of politics.
And from there, we watched a consumer-grade AI take a rigidly constrained prompt about a theoretical escalation happening tomorrow at 8 p.m. and logically trace that threat all the way through the global economy, mapping a path to 15% inflation and a frozen credit market.
It successfully translated a geopolitical threat into a systemic mathematical failure of global liquidity.
Which brings up a final, lingering thought for you, the listener, to consider long after we wrap up today. We just watched an algorithm that anyone can access on their laptop instantly map out a multi-year catastrophic economic cascade based on a single paragraph of text.
Yeah.
If a consumer AI can instantly calculate the precise economic fallout of a geopolitical threat scheduled for tomorrow, what exactly are the proprietary institutional AI models doing right now?
That's the real question, isn't it? The models employed by global financial institutions and automated high-frequency trading firms are magnitudes more sophisticated. They're constantly ingesting real-time data, satellite imagery, global news feeds.
So are those institutional algorithms already quietly shifting trillions of dollars? If they're reading the same threat matrix we just discussed, are they automatically bracing for impact by moving assets, dumping equities, and freezing credit lines hours before the 8 p.m. deadline even arrives?
It's entirely possible.
It forces you to wonder if the algorithm's prediction essentially becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, crashing the market before the first piece of infrastructure is even targeted. It's a chilling concept to ponder. Thank you for joining us today as we navigated this scenario.
It has been a complex but really vital exploration of how artificial intelligence perceives our fragile global systems. Keep questioning the mechanics behind the headlines, and thanks for being with us.